we have a distinguished panel of expert speakers. Jelena Makura is a member of the technical working group for the Platform on Sustainable Finance and head of Sustainable Finance at the European Chemical Industry Council, CFIC. Caroline Schrenwit is Managing Director of the Forum Ökologisch Soziale Marktwirtschaft. Lee Clements is Head of Sustainable Investment Solutions at FTSE Russell, which is part of the London Stock Exchange Group. And Edgar Galrao is Product Sustainability Lead at GE Renewable Energy and formerly at EIT Climate KIC. So perhaps I could begin, since Jelena, I mentioned that you are a member of the technical working group. Perhaps you could begin by making a few sort of introductory remarks, setting the scene, and perhaps amplifying some of the points which we heard very clearly then from Martia and Ben.
Thank you, Jonathan. Good morning, everyone. I hope you can hear me well. First and foremost, I want to thank Afore for inviting me to participate in this workshop series on what is a topic of increasing importance, sustainable finance, and in particular, the EU Taxonomy. The EU Sustainable Finance Agenda has been in development for quite some time, and we have just reached the milestone of formal adoption of the Climate Delegated Act and look forward to the forthcoming adoption of the Article 8 Delegated Act. As we will discuss later in our various interventions, work is ongoing in developing a delegated act on the remaining environmental objectives under the taxonomy regulation, in addition to a complementary delegated act covering certain energy sectors and certain manufacturing activities. But let's zoom out for a moment. Why do we have the EU Sustainable Finance Agenda, and in particular, the EU Taxonomy? The Commission estimates that the current 2030 climate and energy targets require 260 billion euros of additional annual investments. But this number is quite conservative as we anticipate the forthcoming Fit for 55 package. This number further increases as we look to achieve the various components of the European Green Deal, and in particular, the 2050 climate neutrality target. With regards to the EU taxonomy, the development of a common language could enable informed decision-making that fosters investment in environmentally sustainable activities and technologies. However, it's really important to note that the EU taxonomy is a communication tool that represents a direction of travel, and it's not a status of today. It is part of an entire suite of tools that work together to showcase environmental performance and facilitate the transition. We really need to be pulling every policy lever to address the scale of the climate challenge and to transition to a climate neutral, climate resilient, resource efficient, and just economy. Now, in line with the spirit of the taxonomy regulation, the chemical industry continuously strives to improve its production processes, to lower its carbon footprint, and to enable further emissions reduction along the various value chains, while also pioneering breakthrough and disruptive technologies. The chemical industry itself is undergoing an unprecedented transformation, requiring the evaluation of complex and, quite frankly, often interconnected value chains. Capital intensive, the chemical industry requires lengthy lead time, depends on a level playing field with the right economic incentives. I'll end my intervention by noting that many stakeholders are currently assessing how to implement the various provisions of the taxonomy regulation, and it's really clear that this is not a linear process, but one that requires a supportive and well-designed regulatory framework that minimizes uncertainty, ensures comparability, while also safeguarding competitiveness. Thank you.
Thanks very much for that. I welcome comments from other participants on the comments which Jelena has just made. I don't know who'd like to go first, and perhaps I could ask Caroline to go first.
Sure, thanks a lot, Jonathan. I would like to touch on some of the last points that Jelena mentioned, especially regarding the long lead time, clear signal planning, security, and the need for a clear signal, and draw the attention of everybody to the adjacent policy fields that are having a relevant impact on that. For example, taxation policies and direct and indirect subsidies that we still have in a very relevant amount that goes into the billions each year. I would, when having these very sophisticated and detailed discussions on the taxonomy, I think this is a great blueprint, let's say, for these other policy fields. But we really need to be aware that these discussions, they are also ongoing in the context of the Green Deal discussions, but they should not have a different or too far different velocities, because then we run the risk, which is already in place today. But since we need to speed up in the other direction, we need this a turnaround. We really have to get to those policy fields as well and implement these clear signals there too. I think in the mindset, if you think about the market design, we tend to think maybe too little when it comes to what needs to be designed. And all these, underlying incentives, they're having a huge impact on business models that should not be underestimated, I think. And that's why I just want to, let's say, put a plea and awareness on the need of action there too, and also realize everybody who's active in the taxonomy discussions how important the groundwork is that's being done at the moment.
Thanks very much. I'm sure that the view of the importance of the groundwork would be echoed by all of us, and indeed by most people watching too. So it's a very good point to bring out. Lee, I wonder whether you would like to comment next on some of the points.
Yes, thank you very much, Jonathan. I think following on both from some of the comments that Carolyn made and Yelena made about the importance of this, and particularly reflecting on Yelena's comments on the funding targets and the need to move capital into this space more broadly in the greener space, and then more specifically in the recycling and biodiversity space, and the comments of the EU taxonomy being a communication tool and about a direction of travel. There is a real desire within the financial industry to invest in this area, in products providing green kind of solutions. We've been in this space for a number of years, and there is a real desire to do this. However, in order to do that, the communication needs to be translated into data in a clear, simple, and implementable fashion, and done as quickly as possible. We're in a unique time in the sustainable investment environment with the amount of goodwill and desire to put these products in there and get billions of dollars flowing into this space. But it needs a simple framework that is easily implementable and doesn't have stop-start situations as the regulations change.
Thank you very much. I think the easily implementable, there is, I think, necessarily a tension, shall we say, between comprehensiveness on the one hand and easily implementability on the other, which I think sort of came out maybe in some of the challenges which the technical working group has been looking at.
Absolutely. I think that it's always worth thinking about the end users and how they will end up using this as you develop some of these kind of ideas and guidelines. Right.
Thank you very much. Just going to go to you, Edgar, in just a moment to ask for your sort of introductory comments and reactions. But before I do that, can I just remind everybody listening that there is a Q&A facility, and I'm looking forward to lots of questions which we can ask this panel here, but also questions which might also have arisen or been put in your mind by the earlier presentation, which we had immediately before. Edgar.
Sure. So thank you for the invite, and we are keen to learn from everyone. I think this is very important to share those learnings, and I'm happy to be part of this workshop. I definitely second what Yelena and Lee said in terms of long-term stability, in terms of the direction where we want to go. the renewable energy sector, but also the energy sector itself is going through a huge energy transition moment, obviously also the chemical sector. So really reinventing new business models, new technology pipelines coming in almost every day. And obviously bringing this taxonomy will speed up and accelerate and also bring more clarity which technologies and also with the pathway towards, let's say, a low carbon economy. I also want to emphasize what Lee said on data. I think one of the key elements that we have today is the data and digital elements, where we bring together the supply chains and also with our partners to give more clarity. And also when we disclose and report some of this data, the quality of the data is crucial. So collaboration, transparency, new forums, new ways to collaborate, and even new collaboration models maybe could be some of the answers that we're looking for to be a more open and inclusive way to report on this data, and obviously have more informed decision makers for invest in institutions, but also other stakeholders as well.
Thank you very much. My connection went slightly funny then, but I think I picked up what everybody was saying, and I hope that everybody else's connection was all right while that was going on. Can I now sort of turn back to you, Jelena, because I think this is not so much wearing your hat as a member of the technical working group, but wearing your hat as a sort of as an industry representative, if I can put it that way. One of the I think that one of the things that struck me and must have struck us all from the presentations earlier were the necessary complexity. There's no other necessary complexity of the issues which are being addressed by the technical working group, and picking up on the point which we were just talking about with Lee about how we can turn these things, these necessarily complex subjects, into a relatively simple set of approaches which industry and the end users can use. Maybe you, and then perhaps I'd like other colleagues to comment, could highlight what you see from your perspective as the best way to take this forward to make it as practical as possible.
Thank you, and thank you for the various interventions. I can only echo what my colleagues have said. When looking at the development of technical screening criteria for the next 4 environmental objectives, there are some unique challenges in comparison to the Climate Delegated Act. For the circular economy objective in particular, there is really a lack of availability in harmonized, accepted, and clear indicators. As such, it's proven to be difficult to derive technical screening criteria that matches the Climate Delegated Act, for which the majority is quantitative in nature. Again, from the perspective of the circular economy, circular thinking does not only focus on GHG emission reduction potential. Rather, it starts at the product and process design phase. Solutions at the end of the day need to be environmentally benign, cost effective, and should positively contribute to society over the entire life cycle. Now, the chemicals industry has already recognized this challenge, and many chemical industry stakeholders are participating in developing circular metrics. For example, via the World Business Council for Sustainable Development through the Circular Transition Indicators tool. Now, this is just one example, but a relatively mature one. In discussions within CEFIC, but also within the technical working group, there's really an understanding that the circular economy itself is innovative by nature. Therefore, technical screening criteria needs to be flexible enough to account for this. At the same time, the criteria needs to be supportive towards front runners while creating a constructive pull towards the others. And when it comes to financing, there's truly a substantial opportunity for all actors involved, both financial and non-financial. However, given that many of these technologies have yet to reach maturity, mistakes are going to be inevitable and should not be penalized. There really should be no boundaries to finding solutions, especially when it comes to the circular economy. We can't really let the pursuit of perfection become the main obstacle. We can't really be overly prescriptive in what is considered to be a success.
Thank you. We have a question in the Q&A, which seems to have disappeared from. We have a question which was addressed to you, so that's why I want to ask it. I mean, you've sort of half answered the question already, but the question, just for completeness, says taxonomy is a labeling tool, you said that taxonomy is a labeling tool, but it will likely influence market functioning and economic decision making on top of design for tax and subsidies. How will this changing environment be managed politically and economically to ensure stable and predictable allocation of capital? And what are the linked risks and opportunities? I'm actually going to ask Lee to comment on that because it's a financial question. It's about how we go there. But I will then, of course, welcome the comments of others on that question too. Lee, give it a go.
I think it's a very fair question to ask there in terms of how will it influence market functioning and economic decision making. And I think that the answer is that it will serve to highlight companies making this contribution, and it will enable the production of products that include this as one of their criteria. And we've already seen that within the market, that capital flows towards these companies, particularly in the current environment. I think where we're talking about recycling and biodiversity, they are areas which are far less visible within the green space, for want of an umbrella term, and despite the size of the market. So I think as new definitions come in and it highlights those areas, I think it will lead to a flow of capital towards them. Managing that properly requires, as I said, a kind of implementation and a data solution. If it's overly complex, then you won't get the flows of capital because it will be very difficult to implement. I think in terms of the political side of things, I'm probably not the best person to answer that. But more broadly, Yelena focused on what we think, what the EU thinks that the funding requirements are. We think with our research that the green economy is currently about 6% of the global market. From a market capitalization point of view, the equity market, we think it needs to go to at least 10% of that to accommodate the investments that are needed to deal with climate change and the broader issues. I don't know if that answered the question.
I think it's got close to answering the question. So thank you very much for that. But I mean, just to pick up on just your last point there. Do you see the way in which these taxonomies are developing? We don't know the detail yet, but given the sorts of discussions which we were just having immediately before this and this one too, do you see the developing taxonomy in the areas of biodiversity and circular and the other areas as ways which will if treated properly, assist that process, which you were just talking about there, shifting up the investment levels from 6 to 10%?
Absolutely. If you want kind of more specific on those, we see multiple times people talking about the broad green agenda. What they're actually talking about is renewable energy and to a certain extent electric vehicles. So this is being left out. Some numbers to this, we actually think with our kind of view of the broader green market covering all of the EU criteria, and this is global, not just EU, we think that waste and pollution control, which is focused on recycling with a few other pieces, is about 10% of the global green economy. We think that renewable, kind of sustainable food and agriculture, which is where our focus on biodiversity is about 4% of the global green economy, but they get disproportionately less attention than other areas such as the renewable energy equipment market, which we think is roughly the same size as the waste and recycling market. And that is most starkly shown in the performance in the market of these areas. We have a number of indices that have been tracking these areas of the market since 2008, and actually in the last 5 years to the end of May this year, the waste and pollution control area, the recycling area, has actually performed the worst of all the areas, whether you're looking at renewables or water or energy efficiency, and is actually the only area that has underperformed the global equity market. It's performed less than half as well as the energy efficiency segment, which has been the best performing segment. So when you look at investment and flows of capital, how those companies are performing in the market is probably one of the best ways to gauge whether capital is flowing there. But highlighting them with this kind of approach, if it's implementable, if the data all works as my caveat there, I think can ignite more of a flow of capital in there. Recycling is slightly unique from our experience in terms of the fact that it is highly commodity price linked as well, which is probably a benefit in the current environment. But more attention will definitely help this. And we find this on our stock exchange part of the market as well, where there is a deep desire to achieve some level of labeling amongst listed companies to be seen as part of the solution, for want of a better word.
Thank you very much. That's very interesting point there about the what we can describe as the underperformance of the sector compared to what you would hope it would be. Caroline, can I ask you from your perspective how you see some of the conceptual issues underlying the taxonomy being best applied to policy making? And as we shift the focus from principle to practice, what in your perspective would you see as the real world challenges and obstacles, and how might they best be overcome?
Yes, I'd love to. And I would like to start with spreading some optimism because especially when it comes to complexity, I think we all, maybe due to our backgrounds, still underestimate the potential of digitalization. And I happen to have a background in supply chain management, so I have been auditing in the past factories in China, India, the US, wherever. And I think policies often underestimate the capability of manufacturing companies when it comes to data management. So I see the bottleneck less on the industry side and more on the policy side to actually step up their game and become capable, because all this hindersome bureaucracy that everybody is complaining about is due to this disconnect. And if we, so this is an appeal to politics for a more modern approach to regulation, and maybe to increase IT competencies when it comes to making the actual mechanism of control. Because I think many things that look so difficult and unsolvable and overly complex, they can be addressed using available technologies like, for example, the blockchain. And it's sufficiently protected when it comes to confidentiality requirements, justified requirements by the companies. And on the other hand, you don't have to lose the control. And I think there is a lot of synergy potential also when you look at the other mechanisms, looking at the adjacent policies again, for example, potential border adjustment mechanisms that are being discussed. This is a similar kind of, let's say, data level and data quality being required there in order to have a functional mechanism. But well, I think first it's worthwhile, and second it's feasible, and third it really depends on policies to make on the administration to make it work. And well, I'm sure that there will be at least rhetoric contradiction from the industry side. I think in the reality from there it's already quite feasible, and the issue lies more on the other side.
Did you see, you mentioned border adjustment mechanisms there. I mean, do you see border adjustment mechanisms as playing a role in these broader aspects of taxonomy that we're just discussing, such as biodiversity and circular, as opposed to border adjustment mechanisms, obviously, for in relation to climate-related issues?
Well, I would think that there's a potential also that the carbon border adjustment mechanism could be a blueprint, similar like the taxonomy discussions for the execution. And personally, I appreciate that at least we're entering the discussion. But I think from what is being known so far, how the control mechanism will be set up and have a once in a year proof check, and then we look at all data and try to recapitulate what happened in reality. That's what I mean with a little outdated. So the thinking is good and well-intentioned, I think. But if you really want to get out of the bureaucracy issue and also be more fraud resistant, to have a higher grab on validity and making sure that there is no greenwashing and stuff like that, then you should really think of another design. And maybe one last point, if I may, especially when we talk about the circular economy. Of course, there's also some major interruption potential when you really think it through. So if you really make the mechanisms work, if you really have, let's say, a different impact of transport cost on worldwide supply chains, etc. This is there's a lot of adjustment need potential to our own perception of how economies and supply chains should work and could work, and how they may look like in order to be sustainable. So I really see the circular thinking as a potential game changer here.
Oh, thank you very much. Thank you. We've got another question which has come in. What is the answer if companies, and the question means manufacturing companies as well as companies in the finance sector, what is the answer if companies are saying, well, taxonomy is not a must, we finance things as long as they're profitable for us? If others aren't granting funds for such companies, we might get higher spreads. Don't we just need more and clear stop signs even within the regulations? I think what that means, I think I'm sort of, maybe I'm over-interpreting it, but I think what that means is that sort of market-based signals as a way of driving. I mean, taxonomy is meant to encourage market-based signals, but that might not be sufficient. And if it is, in any case, they may play into the business decision process in not a wholly straightforward way. I'm just grateful for any comments or observations on that point. Yelena.
Thank you. Well, my kind of immediate reaction to this is just going back to what I said previously. The EU taxonomy itself is not really the silver bullet solution. Taken in isolation, it's not necessarily, because of the methodology behind it, because of the mechanics, it's not necessarily by itself a representative of a undertakings, whether financial or non-financial, its environmental performance. Rather, it's meant to be used in conjunction with other tools out there, whether it be, for example, the Science-Based Targets Initiative or sectoral decarbonization plans or other kind of policy instruments. We mentioned CBAM just a little while ago, but other kind of policy areas. It's not meant to be used in isolation, and I don't think that was the intention from the Commission in the initial proposal. So it's really important to note this when thinking about the EU taxonomy and thinking about how to implement. Of course, when looking, for example, at the 6 environmental objectives and the do no significant harm principle, these are very broad kind of areas which we are seeing spill over into other kind of policy areas. So while the EU taxonomy itself is a voluntary tool, it's inevitable that some of the ideas and the mechanics and kind of the methodology spill over into other areas of EU policy. So I think that would be my immediate reaction to that question.
Yes, to see it so it's really see this as part of the toolbox. Don't see it as a complete thing, complete and entire, which will deliver. We need to make progress on all fronts in order to get to where we get to.
Yes, you'll need a combination of policy instruments to achieve not only the upcoming Fit for 55 objectives, but also the objectives in the European Green Deal.
Yeah, I'm sure everybody agrees with that, but I'm just looking at the faces just to see whether anybody wants to comment further on the point. Lee.
Yeah, I would reflect what Yelena was saying, that this is part of the toolbox, and it's a very valuable part of the toolbox to identify and flow capital towards these solutions. But if I understand the question correctly, I don't think that it should be seen as the solution to what types of economic activity shouldn't exist and an alternative way to fund unprofitable activities. This should be interacting with a lot of other regulations, be they miles per gallon or pollution regulation for cars, be they solutions banning the kind of lower efficient light bulbs, be they requiring minimum recycling standards for certain products. Those are the ways to deal with that part of the market, which I think he's talking about there, versus trying to flow more capital into these more innovative solution type areas, which we know is already happening, but it just needs to get bigger and faster. Thanks.
Any comments to the point, Caroline or Edgar? Any or other points you want to make arising from that question?
Yeah, I just want to add. I just wanted to add that actually the market itself and the customers will also select which activities we want to promote as well. So be a push for the market itself as well, in terms of reputation, in terms of risk profile as well, because the market itself will, let's say, promote the solutions will be more in line also with the targets, and also to emphasize the science-based targets and other initiatives that really, let's say, bring a tendency to the market that maybe some tools may fail, but overall there must be a result of a bigger movement towards carbon neutrality. Okay,
thanks very much. Up to now, we've been largely discussing, I think, we have been discussing the general issues, but focusing particularly on the sort of circular economy side of things. And I'd just quite like to talk a little bit about biodiversity too, because I think that is a particularly interesting area. It's a huge subject, but we should touch on it if only briefly. I mean, do participants see special challenges here? For example, there are challenges, as we heard in the presentation, arising from sort of the very lack of compared to climate, for example, the very lack of a single target and a simple measure. We are talking by definition about very complex and differently manifested phenomena, which are to some degree also local in nature, which means that their solutions will need to be local in nature. And I just wondered if anybody would like to comment a little bit on that side of things, so on the biodiversity question. Yelena, may I ask you to kick that off, because it's probably something that you have discussed fairly extensively in the group, and I think that would be very interesting to hear your thoughts on it.
Sure. Thank you, Jonathan. Admittedly, I'm not a biodiversity expert. I'm focused more so on the circular economy, but just reflecting on conversations in the technical working group, we're experiencing similar challenges as with the circular economy, in that there's really a lack of accepted and harmonized indicators from which we could derive technical screening criteria from. And as you rightly say, with biodiversity, as with some of the other environmental objectives, there's some local issues as well that it's difficult to reflect this in the technical screening criteria, which is why I refer back to my previous point of when deriving technical screening criteria, yes, it needs to be ambitious, but it also needs to be ambitious, but also constructive enough to pull all the other kind of players along in the transition. So similar to the circular economy approach, I would recommend and advocate for a flexible approach also to be taken when deriving the criteria for biodiversity. And I'm sure you will see this when the midterm recommendations are published later in a few weeks. You'll see this flexibility, and you'll see kind of these assumptions reflected in what has been proposed.
Thank you very much. No, I think we're all looking forward to seeing that very much, seeing those when they come out. Do others, Caroline? Yes, please.
Yes, thank you. I would like to maybe make a link to my previous comment here as well, because when we talk about biodiversity, it actually it's maybe less supply chain management focused, but more on absolute targets. And I think that's the challenge. Like, we really have to protect more habitats than we do at the moment. We really have to, let's say, push back some of the already happening expansion when it comes to agriculture. What I mentioned before, the logistics transportation sector has a huge impact on habitats. There are certain things in the biodiversity discussion, in my opinion, that increase actually the need for efficient action when it comes, of course, to the taxonomy criteria, but also that links the biodiversity discussion to the circularity discussion. And well, that is something that has to be reflected. And here again, we depend on a good data quality. So I think this is a recurring topic also in the previous sessions of this morning. And I'm very interested, like I totally understand what Jelena mentioned regarding the need for flexibility by when it comes to fulfilling requirements. But in biodiversity, it's really about absolute goals, and that is something that you cannot be flexible around. So this really is not for discussion, and I think that makes it a very substantial driver once it's being taken really seriously.
But do you see? I agree with you absolutely that it's to do with sort of, you know, definite absolute goals, but do you see then particular challenges in identifying, I suppose, the path between here and those absolute goals? I mean, you could say on circular, for example. I'm not suggesting circular is at all simple, because it's not. But sort of by definition, there's a clear, you know, the more you can reuse and recycle, the better you are doing on your circularity. On biodiversity, it covers a whole range of different, it manifests itself in a whole range of different ways. And I'm just wondering whether there it is even more challenging to try to identify the measures which you will be using to take it forward, let alone then track those measures.
Yeah, certainly. So I think maybe the biggest headache when it comes to biodiversity is, of course, the way agriculture and fishery and forestry and these kind of things are being done, because those are so very individual and linked to, let's say, I don't know, traditional approaches in different countries, etc. And the whole agricultural sector is, in my perception, on a quite different level of discussion when it comes to this whole like data and management and transparency aspects, actually. So I was talking about manufacturing companies before, and I think the whole technological side, there we have a better grip on what can be done, what needs to be done, and we have experienced that by establishing certain standards and management systems, we can achieve goals. And well, most of them at the moment maybe are focused on pure cost efficiency, but we have the tool in order to achieve a goal. And in agriculture, I think and forestry, I think the picture is much more diverse and heterogeneous, and also the control mechanisms are less established. So I think that's my biggest headache when it comes to biodiversity and other sectors such as transportation. I mean, of course, the overall demand for logistics is a major driver, but here also we have the potential, I don't know, to switch to different fuels, to go to less noise emissions and stuff like that, in order to improve the impact or to lower the impact. But on the agricultural side, that's more difficult. And here again, the mix of circularity and biodiversity is a relevant factor, because many agricultural activities worldwide are being done for trade and export. So there, the whole question again comes into the game: how substantial is the change we are aiming for?
Lee, do you see, or have you come across particular issues relating to this as far as the sort of financing side of things is concerned? I would have thought that there would be various particular questions which arise in relation to financing sort of improvements in biodiversity.
Yes, I mean, there's a number of challenges both in financing this, in terms of where do the biodiversity issues lie in terms of public markets which get scrutiny versus private markets which gets less scrutiny, and the degree to with which biodiversity is a corporate issue versus an issue that is addressed via other financial mechanisms such as government bonds, sub-sovereign bonds, and so on. And a lot of the sustainable investment focus at the moment, and for things like the taxonomy, is very much in the corporate world, whereas some of the broader biodiversity issues, in the way that they're measured at the higher level, can be far more pertinent when you're looking at states, sub-sovereign entities, and countries as a whole, and how you kind of interact between those kind of actors can be important. And I think it's an important stage of development of the broader sustainability market as we look beyond just corporates. From a data point of view, I think that, you know, which is at the heart of a lot of the specific EU taxonomy area for biodiversity. I think there are a number of issues which we've already highlighted. The lack of a common metric is very challenging. It's a lot easier to look at carbon, to look at recycling rates, to look at energy efficiency rates than some of the broader kind of biodiversity issues. Although we certainly welcome the starting up of the task force for nature-related financial disclosures, which we hope will help to kind of focus this and bring the attention towards it. And I think some of the longer term nature of the issues in biodiversity can be a challenge there, because we're used to measuring things on shorter term, and if you're looking at longer term issues, it's difficult. And the national level issues of this as well, because we need to remember the EU taxonomy is one thing that's going on. There's a number of other national taxonomies going on, and a number of the biodiversity issues are cross-border or are particularly focused in areas of the world outside of Europe, whereas a lot of the investors and the capital flow are looking globally. So if you're a European investor trying to finance something related to biodiversity in Brazil, if the regulations don't match up, and we think that overall the green economy is only about 20% European, about 40% North American, and 40% Asian, then it creates more challenges. And the final thing I would say on that is, whilst targets at a higher level are very important, as Carolyn mentioned, one of the challenges we have from a kind of data measurement point of view is tracking those challenges through market kind of value chains and so on. When you're looking at the overall impact of biodiversity in the agricultural industry, when you're then looking at how the chemical industry impacts that, how various new technologies in farm machinery and so on impact that, tracking back how a smart tractor can impact the overall farming biodiversity metrics, can be quite challenging. And similarly, the impact on biodiversity of other environmental objectives, such as water, and the impact of clean water on biodiversity, or the impact of other pollution control on biodiversity, is an area where tracking these metrics through these systems can be challenging, but a great opportunity as well, because we see a lot of interest in this space and a lot of capital that would like to be put to work in this space.
Very good. Edgar, I will come to in a moment for your thoughts on this, but again, may I flag up that particularly as the clock is continuing to tick, that any questions from the many participants who are listening into this would also be very welcome. And before I go to you, Edgar, can I just ask a quick question to Yelena, picking up from what you were saying, and Lee, because you rightly mentioned the task force on nature-based financial disclosures, and Marcia, one of the points that she was making earlier on was, of course, the need to think about these things internationally and to internationalize them, not least because, as you said, Lee, perhaps the bulk of investment which comes out of Europe isn't actually into European companies. I mean, a lot of it is into non-EU companies. So, Yelena, I just wondered if you could just touch very briefly on discussions which might have taken place in the technical working group about how the read across to these other activities, such as the task force on nature-based financial disclosures.
Thank you, Jonathan. What I can say on this particular topic is, and again, also reflecting the fact that CEFIC has a membership that also has a global footprint, that are assessing not just the implications of the EU taxonomy and the taxonomy regulation, but also kind of surrounding initiatives like the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive and also the Non-Financial Reporting Directive that is currently in place. So what I'm going to refer to what Efrag published in their recent report, which is that there is a recognition that kind of EU actions and kind of policies and initiatives, they need to align as into what's happening in the international space. However, there's also recognition that EU ambition will always be more than what is happening on a global level. So while there is a recognition for alignment with what's happening in kind of global conversation, there's also an understanding that kind of what's happening in the EU will always be a little bit more ambitious. So within the conversations, not just within CEFIC, but also within the EU platform, we're trying to find a balance between, okay, how can the technical screening criteria, for example, be balanced so that it is ambitious, but it's also not distorting kind of what's happening on an international level. So while we do consider what's happening in certain international task forces, there's also an understanding that we do also go beyond this in certain elements, but we also do recognize the importance of aligning to ensure that those companies that do have a global footprint can also seamlessly participate in these initiatives.
It's a very, very difficult balance to be struck, but I think it's very welcome that, that as you say, this is, the need for that balance is recognized by the in the working group and in the work which is being done. So because we obviously need to take all this forward in a way which is pragmatic and which is actually going to work rather than a way in which it isn't. Edgar, sorry, you've been very patient. I was going to ask you to come in as well on the subject of biodiversity and on related issues.
Sure. I think the key word here is harmony. I mean, not only in circular economy, but also in biodiversity when it comes to metrics. There's a wide range of standards, and companies, let's say, have almost like a fatigue of reporting and disclosing. So there's the need to harmonize not only indicators, but also the standards. So obviously, EU taxonomy tries to bridge that gap when it comes to the harmonization on circular economy, but also biodiversity. So really, what we be interesting to see is really harmonize or leveraging the work has been done already at the industry level and sectoral level, and also bring some of those learnings and insights into upcoming criteria and metrics. Another key element I'd like to highlight is really some of the principles are very general, and it's hard to have granularity and even relevance for certain sectors. So perhaps a sector-specific, let's say, approach could add value not only level of granularity, but also action-driven disclosure, because disclosing for disclosing is interesting for certain decision makers, but what companies are looking for is really disclosing with the added benefits to act upon it. So obviously a sector-specific or something that would allow companies to drive change based on that disclosure is very welcome as well. When it comes to biodiversity, I mean, Natural Capital Protocol comes to mind when it comes to be the leading consortium of corporates trying to lead in terms of trying to allocate some capital value into nature, but obviously regional differences will also take into consideration. The biodiversity in Brazil is completely different, let's say, in Turkey or vice versa. So need to be let's say, holistic enough to observe those differences and understand biodiversity, and the value that nature has in those regions is completely different. So the solutions and technology profile will also be different. So these were the two comments that just to make in this regard.
Can I just follow up on that second comment which you made, which is a very interesting one, which is how, because I think it's an interesting one looked at from the sort of corporate point of view, or indeed from the point of view of financial businesses that actually need to apply these things to their activities, because as you say, solving issues around biodiversity is essentially varies considerably from one local area, one local region to another. Would you see that there is an issue here for, in particular, for corporates which are active in many different jurisdictions, as to how precisely they should calibrate that and how they should calibrate their own activities in terms of what they're doing?
I think it starts from a value chain eco-design perspective. We need to start from each part of the product and where we start to define the materials, the products, thinking in biodiversity immediately. So have the biodiversity elements in all parts of the supply chain to really prevent those mechanisms. So it's embedded in all processes of the product development, and this will reflect where the companies are based. So for example, if you think about biodiversity, maybe you should influence your sourcing procurement guidelines. Is there any forestation metrics? Are there any, let's say, standards on eco-labeling in terms of sourcing for wood, for example? So if you have this life cycle thinking and you embed biodiversity throughout your life cycle, this is one way where you can have a global view and try to mitigate this wherever you operate, for example.
Okay, thanks very much. I don't know whether anybody else wants to comment on that aspect of things. Caroline?
Yeah, I'd like to maybe to bring the just referring to what Efrag just said, the overall goal. So why are we doing this? Why are we having all these discussions into our awareness? Because as much as I understand what Jelena said regarding the risk of distortion and companies who are exposed in different markets, etc., I think we also have to, and this is relates to policy, but not only, to look at what we can do in order to accelerate things elsewhere. And that is a mix of, let's say, climate foreign policies. This is a mix of climate financing contributions. But I also think that the industry players and they are relevant, very relevant voices in the overall political discussion. And they also have a role in the other markets where they are active in. And I have spent quite some time of my life in developing and even least developed countries. So I know that the state of things is very, very different there. But this, in my understanding, this is exactly the point we are discussing about. Like if you take mining, for example, and you are a resource rich but underdeveloped country, of course it is logical and understandable to say, well, we try to develop by exploiting those resources in order to find a perspective for ourselves. When we talk about the circularity, it's how to use these resources more efficiently and even in a circular way. So we have to have less mining. But then it's also in our responsibility, if you want, to provide perspectives beyond resource extraction for those countries. So it is certainly a complex task. There's no denial of that. But if you look at the actual risk behind and why we have the discussion, which is a really much more fundamental loss of balance and destabilization of the conditions we are working under when it comes to weather, when it comes to availability and renewability of resources, especially when we talk about agriculture, forestry, and things like that. I think we really have to tackle it. So this is like an appeal to all players, maybe policies at the forefront, but industry as well to make offers. And well, there are now talks about climate clubs and stuff like this, which is for the front runners. But we also have to make sure that not a relevant amount of countries is being left behind and totally falls into a, let's say, opposite direction. I think this is also a huge risk.
I think that's a very important point, and I'm very glad you brought that out. And what is also brought out there it's something which we haven't really discussed much during this session, but did come up, was flagged up in the previous session, which is of course the key point about transition and how you actually get from here to there, and how you make sure that transition is just, so that you can so that people, countries, regions, and others can adapt in an appropriate sort of way in order to help us achieve the objectives which we want to achieve. We're almost completely out of time now, but I would just like to ask all panelists, starting again with Jelena, then I'll do it in this order. Yelena, Lee, Caroline, and Edgar, just to make a few closing remarks, just to wrap this up. Yelena.
Thank you, Jonathan, and thank you to the rest of the colleagues on the panel. I think that what I can just reaffirm is that the European chemical industry, at the end of the day, we understand the objectives of the EU Taxonomy, and we are very much supportive of developing the EU Sustainable Finance Agenda, and we look forward to continuing to be a part of this dialogue and to participate with evidence and technical-based recommendations wherever needed in any of the ongoing and forthcoming initiatives in the EU Sustainable Finance Agenda.
Thank you. Lee.
Yes, I would similarly reiterate what I said at the beginning, that we think it's great that the EU is focusing on these large, important, but currently under-focused on areas of green issues, that there is a genuine desire from the financial industry to increase the flow of capital into them, but a plea to the EU to think about how the financial industry uses these, and whilst they are complex areas, to try and consider how we can make them as implementable as possible, because I think that will directly relate to the speed and amount of the flow of capital into them once the regulations come out.
Thank you. Caroline.
Well, I would like to close by also reaffirming what I said in the beginning. So being aware of the meaningfulness of the work that is being done in the taxonomy discussions, and also apply it to the, let's say, if you want, fiscal finance policy discussions. We have relevant activities upcoming regarding taxation guidelines, and also the huge and barely discussed field of environmentally harmful subsidies. So this is actually my biggest concern, because we don't have a level playing field at the moment, and if we don't tackle that part too, it will stay tilted. So this is really like to make sure that all things that happen in the sustainable finance and taxonomy discussions actually are also being considered there. And I think many of the players also here on the panel, they can have an influence on those discussions as well.
Thank you. Edgar.
Yeah, just to reiterate that we definitely welcome more harmony. We welcome the exercise that's been done. We are very supportive. We are open to discuss and support these initiatives, and we welcome all harmonies and really disclosure and transparency to bring to our business and add the value insights. How can we be better and together go to a carbon neutral future?
Thank you very much. Well, in a normal situation, if we were sitting together in a room, this is the point at which I would ask the audience to show their appreciation in the usual way. But unfortunately, we can't do that. So you'll just have to imagine that they are applauding and thanking you for your very clear presentations, very interesting discussions, very interesting points which we've brought out, which I think, building on the earlier presentation which we had earlier, highlights the substantial agenda which we have in front of us, but also I think points to ways in which we can make very good progress in dealing with that agenda. So again, I would like personally to thank you very much for participating in this panel, and thank you very much for all your comments and observations.